Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations with Vegan Women Leaders. I'm your host, Katrina Fox, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Kimberly Renee. Now, Kimberly is a self-taught private chef in Atlanta, Georgia, and the founder of Might Be Vegan, a plant-based media and marketing consultancy designed to help people live a more healthful life by eating more plants. Before launching Might Be Vegan in 2018, Kimberly was the CEO of ContentPark, a tech-driven content development agency that worked with major brands including Macy's, AT&T, and Southern Company. Passionate about health and veganism, especially for BIPOC communities, among her many initiatives, Kimberly created the award-winning National COVID-19 Hunger Relief Program, Food by Might Be Vegan. And just as an aside, yes, Kimberly is vegan, because I know there's going to be people wondering. And this program provides families in need with nutritious, plant-based food at no cost to them. Kimberly, welcome to the show. So great to have you.
So glad to be here. I'm glad we finally were able to coordinate it. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So look, I would love to, because you've got an amazing professional background and we're going to dive into the Food for Love program and some other things, but I'd love to know just a little bit about you. Like, tell us a little bit about your life growing up and any specific experiences that have shaped who you are today.
Yeah. So I've always been quite the nerd, if you will. I went to a science, math, technology academy when I was in high school. And so a lot of my experiences as an adult have been impacted by that because I spent so much time just diving into computers and sciences, and all of that became relevant when I decided to study marketing in college, and then use that as the baseline for developing my business, which I now run, called Might Be Vegan.
Amazing. Wonderful. So what made you go into that, like, marketing, media? What kind of drew you to that?
Yeah. So honestly, Katrina, my first role, my first job interest was actually, I wanted to be a doctor because it was really so when you're immersed in science, math, and tech, these are the jobs that you know about. You know about being an engineer, you know about being a doctor, you know about being a surgeon. Like that's what I knew because I was so good at science, math, and tech. But when I got to college and I actually started taking the coursework, I was just like, this is the most boring stuff. And I was like, I cannot imagine myself doing this for the rest of my life. Like I cannot. So I remember watching a commercial. I don't know what it was about or what it was for, but I was looking at it and it just drew me in. And I was just like, this is so cool. Like, it was the filmmaking and the storytelling. And I was just like, oh my God, what do you call this? Now I know for some people, they're like, well, obviously I know what that's called. My world I was living in a vacuum of science, math, and tech, and marketing was not even a word that I knew. I had a couple of friends who were marketing majors, and I said, you study what? What is that? And they said, well, it's marketing. I said, well, what? I said, what market, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, it was so foreign, right? When it clicked to me that there was a connection between storytelling and selling, that's when I decided to change my major, because I wanted to be a part of the creative side of me, because my dad is very much a scientist. My mom is an artist. And so marketing allowed me to do both. It allowed me to bring together the science of psychology, the science of consumer behavior, all of that, and connect it with analytics and things like that. And then also the creative part. And so I realized very young that in order for me to be happy, I had to have both. And so that's what marketing gives me an opportunity to do.
I love that. I love that you're kind of a mix. Yeah. Like you said, I hadn't thought of it like that actually with marketing. You're right. It does have that kind of that science, analytical side to it, especially with the data, with the creativity. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one thing I love about is people who don't necessarily fit into one box. And I noticed on your website, you say you're anything but one dimensional. Now we're going to dig into a little bit more about, what you've been doing, but just as a little icebreaker, I want to start with these. You said you would like to be a wannabe hacker. Tell me more.
Oh my goodness. So I took my first computer science class, I think in 10th grade. And I was so good at it that I got the highest marks on the state exam. But because I was so focused on being a doctor, I never thought to pursue it. After I graduated, it was right around the time where there was a boom of technology companies. It was right before kind of like the big crash around, everybody wants to have a, that kind of, I guess that kind of dates me a little bit. But everybody had a tech company, right? And it was sort of like right around that time that I was like, well, being able to program is actually relevant now as a marketer. Like being able to look at a website and understand the code, or if I want to start a business, being able to for example, or because I can actually do that. I don't, because now there are tools that help you to, get beyond having to actually code. You can just kind of build from the visual side. But like I've learned how to build technology, and that thinking is a lot of what I use to problem solve. There's a lot of if this, then that in computer programming. So like when I'm thinking about things like how do we address and solve food insecurity, I'm looking at all of the inputs, all of the variables, and saying how do they intersect one another, and how can we develop a program, in quotes, using technology to address it and to solve it. And that's ultimately what Food Love is, because I've had people say, well, how the heck did you make a national hunger relief program that doesn't have an office, that can feed anybody anywhere? And it's the mindset of a technologist. And that's kind of what I mean by say I'm a wannabe hackers, because I do hack things, in the sense of putting them together to make them function, not the negative side of hacking, like stealing
right.
side, but more of the hacking together of things.
I love that. I think that's amazing. I was in one of my questions is, which I'll ask you in a bit, about setting that up, because I was really impressed at how you set all that up. I'm like, wow. And now it's starting to become clear. It's like that side is coming out. And I noticed you're also a weekend karaoke singer. What are your favorite songs? What do you perform? Goodness. Don't worry, I won't make you sing on the show unless you want to. But
so I love singing R&B and soul music. So I have a couple of artists that like fit within my range. So like Erykah Badu or Lauryn Hill or Jill Scott. So those kind of soul singers that have like an alto range. That's kind of where my voice falls.
Oh, I love that. So I love that you're such a mixture of all these things and wear lots of hats, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So with your career background, so we've touched on this a little bit. So you got into marketing, and then you ran a content development agency until 2018 before launching Might Be Vegan. Tell us a little bit about that, and like the kinds of work that you did, like the types of content you made and the work that you did for brands.
Yeah. So this company, kind of ContentPark, started almost accidentally. I was working at an agency, and I was in the role of an SEO analyst. And part of my job in that role was to help our clients build links in order to improve their SEO position. And in doing that, we often would pitch ideas for content to other sites where we wanted our links to live. And in doing that, I ended up getting people's feedback and said, well, you're a really good writer. Can I hire you? Now, mind you, I'm technically working for another company, but they want to hire me to write for them. And so I was like, I can't really do that. So I found some friends who would write for me. And then we would submit and so it kind of happened unintentionally. And what I also noticed in the industry at the time, and we even see it still to this day, that often creators are not compensated fairly for their time and work. We see that writers, I know there's a site called Fiverr and some other sites where you can get articles for like $5 and $10. I'm like, this is unfair. So when I decided to build an agency, it was because I wanted to advocate for writers who deserved fair pay. So basically our agreement was, I'm going to go out and sell for you if you just write for us. So that's what I did. They got to, be their reclusive selves, and I got to put on my sales hat, my marketing hat, and go out and pitch the opportunity for my writers. And so we did that for several years until I got tired and stressed and decided, okay, I needed to start telling my own stories. What was important for me? I needed a space to tell my own stories because I spent so much time telling stories for other people. You know, we worked for Shady Grove Fertility Clinic, which is the largest fertility clinic in the US. We worked for the California University System, which is the largest university system in the US. We worked for Macy's. We worked for the largest privately held company in Canada. Like, we were making some major moves. But that's a lot of work and weight, you know, to manage a team of about 8 people, and then also to function sometimes as an editor, but then also selling. All of those 3 together, it was a lot of work on me, a lot of weight on me. And we had to make a decision, like, I can't keep running at this pace. So in that moment, and what I could handle as far as my own stress levels. So we kind of pulled away from everything. And then I had to kind of define, like, what is now my story? And part of my story was the things that I was eating. It was the adventures that I was going on, my adventures in the kitchen, out in the world, and even my story just as a Black person in the US, and the history of my people before they got here and after, the stories of that have been buried for different reasons, and being able to bring that to life. And so now I have a space where I can share that.
I love that. So how did you turn that into? Tell us about Might Be Vegan. So you launched Might Be Vegan. Tell us first of all why the name, because I know when I first saw it, I think I even messaged you and I was like, are you vegan? Can you please confirm you're vegan? So it's quite, but it's great because it gets people talking, it gets people thinking. But tell us why you chose the name.
Yeah. So when I thought of the word vegan before going vegan, I imagined experiences that I'd had before that were very judgmental. People whose passions were so large that I felt not welcome. And I wanted to create a space where people felt comfortable trying, because I'm not the type of person who makes moves and does things based on peer pressure. I try to make informed decisions. I try to make a decision that is sustainable for me, not just because I have some outside force telling me that that's what I should do. I don't work well under that kind of pressure. Making me angry doesn't make me want to do it. It makes me want to do the opposite, you know? So I wanted to create a space where people could come and like be like, hey, I really love chicken and I don't know what to do about it. I mean, I don't know how to, can you help me? And then they not feel like I was going to be like, oh, you still eat chicken? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want, like, that's not who I am. And that's not how I receive things well. So I have friends who have messaged me, said, hey, I went vegan. And then, you know, some that says I went vegan for a little bit and then I stopped for a little bit, you know, and it's like, here's a judgment-free zone for you to allow us to figure it out together. And so that's why it started that way. And I didn't know at the time if it was just going to be me making food for people or creating recipes. But then once I got into the space, I realized that there were so many people like me who were creating recipes, who had food blogs. And I was like, I don't want to just be another person doing the same thing. I mean, yes, I know I'm unique and I can possibly offer it a unique way. But as a marketer, I understand what it means to have a competitive advantage. And I understand what it means to have a niche. And I wanted to have that. I didn't want to just be and do what everybody else was doing. And so the way that I approach content creation is not one that you see a lot of creators doing. And it allows us as a business to try new things and try new ways. So with Food Love, for example, it's part of the business. It is one of the projects because we take on a new project annually, or we run year-long programs. And so Food Love was a program that allowed me to introduce people who were not vegan to plant-based food. But I didn't do that through, oh, here's my social media account, come look at my video. I did that through, here's food because you're currently in need. You know, the year before we did something called Vegan at the Game. The Super Bowl was in Atlanta, and we came together and fed about 1,500 people free. we gave them vegan food. And that was another way that we encourage people to eat plant-based without doing it the traditional way. So I'm kind of more of the experiential marketing. That's kind of where I lean, more so than just the video side of it.
Wow, I love that. I love that. So in terms of how you work with brands, because obviously, giving up your content development agency and then going into this, like, was there a transition period? Like, because I can see, people obviously think, oh, that's amazing, I'd love to do something like this. But how did you transition that into making it a career? Like, were you able to work with some of the brands that you kind of had already worked with to like get it off the ground immediately, or was there a period where you had to kind of just create some content and build up the new business?
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was like, let's do whatever we have to do to make money. Like, it wasn't, and there was no clear path at the very beginning. It was, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm showing up every day. And when I say why, I don't know, I kind of knew why, but it was more so I don't know exactly what this business is going to look like. So I knew it connected to food. I knew it connected to mission. Opportunity for us to do the Super Bowl event, that's when it became a lot more clear. I was like, okay, yes, I love food, but I love the experiences. And so even with the event that we did at the Super Bowl, that event didn't make money. It was literally like, it cost me money out of my own personal pocket to put that on, to feed everybody. And then when it came to like Food Love didn't make any money. But what happens is when I do and create these experiences, because they're so large and dramatic, they draw attention. And then that attention is what then leads to business. Because then people will say, we love what you did here. Would you be willing to maybe create some content with us? Or we love because then people are actually connecting with what I believe and not just my audience. And that's a very different type of client. It's somebody that aligns with who you are, and they're less focused on metrics and more focused on mission. And that's why kind of doing the really big things works for us, because what's left over are some quality relationships.
I love that, because you're right, because a lot of brands, I think they kind of like look at someone's Instagram and it's like, oh, how many followers have they got? Or does their feed look pretty? Oh yeah, let's reach out and work with them, and hopefully they'll hold up a picture or do a video of our product, kind of thing. And you're right, that is very different, where people kind of go, they're inspired by what you're doing in your larger mission. So I love that you shared that. Amazing. Wonderful. Now you touched on this a little bit about the in terms of compensation for content creators. And I know I've sort of seen this discussed as well. And I think particularly, and I don't, if you could perhaps talk about your experience, that can impact, I think, people of color even more so. I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that and what you're doing about that, because I know you're, very passionate about it, and whether you've seen any change since the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter situation from last year. Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So after the police murder of George Floyd, a lot of brands got really active about engaging with Black people in particular. And it was interesting because I got a lot of people who were talking to me like, oh, you're a creator, you're a Black creator, let's make some things. I'm curious, however, if that same sentiment still exists, right? Because we're talking about not just reacting because you feel emotionally indebted, but because we're trying to move towards a more equitable environment in business. For me, that's the motivation. The reason that I'm intentional about finding people in a particular demographic is because I want to make sure that diverse perceptions and diverse perspectives are represented, and that when someone looks at our brand, they can see themselves. Like, this is a bigger, broader brushstroke, not like, oh crap, we don't have any Black people on our social media, let's go get some people to stand in. And since that time, I've actually had several conversations with media. I think BuzzFeed interviewed me and some others, asking me about how I felt about creators being invited to the room. And I'm like, I appreciate the invitation, but we also, just as you said, have to talk about equity as far as pay. And in order to talk about equity for pay, we have to have transparency. And the problem with business is they're choosing not to be transparent. And that lack of transparency is what's going to perpetuate inequities between how men and women are paid, inequities between how people of different ethnic backgrounds are paid. And until that happens, I consider any movement forward to be performative. Because the only way that we make change, even with the things that we have been asking with respect to the police departments, it's the covering up of things. It's the lack of transparency. It's the biases that we're not addressing internally. You know, it's all of that perpetuates what we have been talking about. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I can personally say that even though I had a lot of brands trying to throw money at me, I can tell who was actually legitimately serious, honestly, because of either how they interacted with my content or whether or not they're still around and talking. You know, if they were just throwing up a photo or if they're actually saying, how do we make visually, but internally, how do we build processes around so that we don't enable more bias and more disparities? How do we build policies to protect people from doing that? If that makes sense. I guess I can say it as an example, right? So there's a brand that I had a conversation with, and one of the things was about hiring and how the majority of the people that work there were white people. And one of the things that they decided to do was create policies that said that every time they look at a candidate, they have to evaluate that candidate, not just on the candidate pool, to make sure that the candidate pool itself was diverse before it moved forward. And so that was part of the policy. They also decided that before a person of color was removed from the stack of consideration, there actually had to be documented reasoning, you know, and not just, oh, we don't like them or they're not a culture fit. You have to actually say why this is. And those are policies that help check our biases, that keep us from blindly maintaining unconscious bias, if that makes sense. And so I think that has to happen with brands, and mostly we see through it, you know, so we hope for better, but I don't think we're there yet.
No, yeah, because I know this is something you've been, you know, passionately advocating for. I think you were even offering to work with brands to help them do that. Did you get much uptake on that? Like, because I think you were initially kind of putting it out and saying, "Hey, look, I'm not trying to even sell you anything. I'm just happy to have a conversation with you." What sort of reaction did you get?
Some people were excited about it. They were like, "Oh my God, yes, please help us. We don't know what to do." I'm like, "Great, let's talk." You know, and so I offered them, you know, a 30-minute conversation of just, here are some things that I recommend. Here are some things to look at. These are some opportunities. And most of them were like, these are things that we have not thought about, or these are things that we considered but didn't know how to implement. It wasn't like some lengthy consultation or like months and months of work, but it was just enough to get them kind of going one way or the other. And we saw quite a few brands actually make some really significant changes from that. But then there were some brands that either ignored it, and, you know, that was fine. And then some brands that, one in particular actually made a video about that was like, we don't really need help from anybody. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was interesting. That ended up being a video. And since that time, because of that video, they're the actual brand that made those significant policy changes, because they ended up kind of being called to the carpet and a light kind of being shown into what was really happening. I think that is my most loved and hated video on YouTube right now, because some people will watch it and be like, I don't understand what you're even talking about. And I'm like, that's exactly the point.
Yes.
The fact that you don't know what I'm talking about is the reason that these things are being perpetuated in business, because you can't see them. And so I've done my job in this instance, because the brand itself has said, you're right. Now, I've also seen consistently now that they are not only just, working with creators and paying them fairly, because that was a concern as well, but it's a diverse group of creators. And they're actually now giving them fair compensation, because a lot of these people they don't always know, will come to me and be like, is this fair? You think this is a good number? I'm like, yeah, that's a good number. You know, so people talk to me regularly. I even created something called Creator Club, specifically for creative entrepreneurs to help them more effectively run their business. Because there's so much information out there about how do you grow your following? How do you, edit this on your video? But there's a lot of stuff as it relates to just the business side, the stuff that I was trained to do, in studying entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur, being a creative entrepreneur, things that aren't talked about so much. Things as simple as, what can you actually write off? Like on your taxes. Like, I have had so many conversations, one actually recently with a new client, and there were some things that he thought he could write off on his taxes, and I'm like, this is not okay. Like, we need to fix this, or people not understanding how to set up their business from, should this be a C Corp? Should this be an S Corp? How do I know? Just some of the basic things, but even further down the road, like, how do I then pitch myself to brands? Yes. How do I make myself stand out? Because just to give an example, with the way that I pitch with brands, the conversion rate that I have tends to be between like 50 and 60% conversion rate for pitches that go out. But that's because, like, I've literally done this sort of thing for years. Because if you remember, one of the things that I said earlier is that I advocated for writers. I pitched us to brands, big Southern company, like these Fortune 500 companies. I'm pitching them and they're agreeing to work with little old me. So this is the same sort of thing. And it doesn't mean that you have to have 1 million followers. You know what I mean? Like, you have to know who you are. You have to know your angle. You have to know what you uniquely bring to the table, why it has to be you to get it done. There's certain things that I put in these pitches because I am a writer, I'm a storyteller, and I know how to pitch for that. So Creator Club is designed to help people be more effective in however they engage with brands. You don't have to be an influencer. You could be a yoga teacher and you want to work with brands to sponsor your work because that's another line that you want to get paid in. Or maybe you're what are those things called? Or like you do like the sound, like it's like what's it called?
Podcast?
No, it's like a device that you have, and then you like hit it, and it's almost like a sound bath,
Oh, okay.
So maybe that's your creative, element, whatever it is. It's about how do you run your business and do that with efficiency, do that through technology. So I'm bringing all of the technology stuff that I've gathered over the years and all the tools that I use to make the process run seamlessly. And I'm giving that away to creators in Creator Club. So that is,
I love that. I think that's so important. Yeah, to kind of say, oh, well, how? Because it is. I think a lot of people go, oh, I wonder how much do you charge? Is that? I think that's all really important stuff that you're doing. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about Food Love. So like you said, you have a project that you do each year, and I believe Food Love is on hiatus at the moment as of the 1st of June. But it's an amazing project. So you created it to help families during COVID-19, but it's quite a unique program. But tell us. I'll let you tell us a little bit about it. What is it and how does it work?
Yeah. So Food Love was a year-long program. We started it back in late April. We did a soft test, but it was really it's a hunger relief program, fully plant-based, location independent, and we're able to deliver food to anybody, anywhere in need, as long as they have a mailbox. And that was a unique approach because in most cases, when you think about food insecurity and you think about food banks, you think about that physical location in your community where you can go to get food. And what was happening during COVID, there were a few things. One, there were some restrictions often being placed on who could get food because they had to prove that they were a resident of a particular area. And I understood that to an extent because it's like we want to help our community and we don't just want random people coming through. But the bias that's entered in that moment is, what about somebody who may be living with a loved one or, and they're not a resident, right? Maybe they're staying with somebody and they're not a resident. Or what about people who are undocumented? Then that means that even though that they may be farm workers and they may be helping or whatever their jobs are, they're not able to get support in this moment. So it created sort of a blind spot. But then there were other people who were not able to go out, people who were maybe going through medical treatments, and they needed to stay home, or maybe they had certain pre-existing conditions that necessitated that they stay inside as much as possible as not to contract COVID, because at that time we didn't have a vaccine, and they were more likely to have more negative outcomes because of their pre-existing conditions. What about those people who didn't live near food banks? What about those people who didn't have transportation? So it was all those things of people that were not considered that we wanted to say, okay, well, what about the others? So I tested it out with a friend of mine who was a social worker in North Carolina, because that's where I was staying at the time. And I asked her, I said, do you have anybody that doesn't have transportation and is like in need, like of food? And she was like, oh my God, yes. She was like, they're calling me like every other day for like help, but I don't have anything for them yet. And I said, okay, cool. Well, let me try something and let me see if I can get them something to eat. And so that was our first test case with a friend who was a social worker, and we delivered food to their houses. So we delivered that first set. And then it was just a matter of scaling it. How do we now address everybody in the country? Now, I say that past tense because we did it. But honestly, Katrina, on the front end, this was the most scariest thing I've ever done, because I didn't know if it was going to work, because I didn't know if people were going to believe in the idea, because our focus community, because those were the folks who were kind of falling under the radar more often. So when I first started doing the outreach for this program, most of the brands said no. Honestly, most of them said no. Actually, really? I'm lying. All of them said no.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I guess we're not doing it, because I don't. And the people from High Point, actually, I fed them with my own money because we didn't have a partner at that time. I just wanted to see if it'll work. So actually, you know what? I'm lying. I fed them with my own money, but I used a coupon that I had for like 50% off of meals being delivered. So I used that, and I was just like praying to the universe, like, if this is something that I need to do, then these resources have to come. And at the end of May of last year, kind of around this time, maybe about a month ago, that's when George Floyd was murdered. And it was after that I started repitching those same brands again. And I modified the pitch a little bit. And then they all started to say yes, because now their minds were open to what bias might look like, or what differences in experiences or inequities might look like. And so they were like, you're right. Yes, we should. We totally should. You're right. And it was like they saw it through a different lens in that moment. And we had brands who had previously said no, we went back to, and they were like, yes, absolutely. It was just like, whoa, like what it took. It was so tough for me at that time, because I was like, I'm thankful that we can feed people, but the cost of it just was nauseating. You know what I mean? Just to be like, it took this for you to hear what I was saying, you know?
Exactly.
So all of that to say, the program ran for a little over a year. Our goal now is to take the technology and the efficiencies and the companies that have agreed to continue to support in this way, and bridge that into an existing food program. So that can give them some exponential opportunities that they didn't have before. And then it gives those who were connected to our program an opportunity to consistently still get vegan food if they need it. So that's kind of, so it's on hold so that we can find an adoptive parent.
I love that. Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible to do something like that. Now, I noticed you mentioned you worked specifically with social workers or caseworkers to find your families. Why did you choose that route rather than, I don't know, maybe going kind of direct to the person? Why did you go that route?
So we didn't have unlimited resources. And one of the things that I didn't want to do, I didn't want to put myself out there and say that I can help somebody, and then we get such an overwhelming response that I couldn't actually do it. So I had to answer the question, who within the community would understand the need and see the need? Because I didn't also want to vet people, because that just felt gross. You know what I mean? And the reason that I thought that there had to be something in the middle that would say, who should this go to, is an example. So I was staying with my mom at the time. I stayed with her during the pandemic, when we were in lockdown. And it was one day she was like, hey, so the church is giving away some vegetables. I'm going to go get some. And I said, okay. So she goes up there and she gets her vegetables and she comes back. And I said, well, what'd you get? And she told me. And then she says, you know what? I said, what? She said, I think that was supposed to be for people who didn't have anything. And I'm like, okay. So my mom went up, she got some food, she got some free things because she wanted something free. Because people, anybody, if they say, here, you want some free apples? Sure, I'll take some free apples.
Yeah.
It wasn't pitched to her as, if you are struggling to feed your family, here's an opportunity. And so I didn't want that to kind of happen. You know, I didn't want to have to, my mom didn't need any food. Her refrigerator is overflowing, you know, but she loves free things like everybody else. So I didn't want that to happen. We actually did have that happen in one instance where the website that we were using, community, like a street of people, started spreading it and sharing it with their friends. And I noticed it because all the addresses were like side by side by side by side. And so I emailed one of them and I was like, hey, do you have like a social worker? She was like, oh, no. I said, well, how'd you find out about it? She was like, oh, somebody just sent it to me in an email. And I'm like, we can't target and help people in need if people who just want free things are showing up. So we had to have a measure of be hyper targeted. You know, we wanted to make sure like, okay, this person is struggling. And I need to know who would know that. And so that's why we worked with who we did.
Amazing. Very smart. I noticed on the website, a lot of the communities that you're working with, you use the term they're living as a result of food apartheid. For anyone who's watching or listening that perhaps isn't familiar with that term, and particularly in somewhere like the US, can you just explain what that is?
Yeah. So most people, I think, are familiar with the term food desert. Food desert is often used to describe an area where people live who their community does not have a grocery store within like a 1 mile radius or something like that. When you hear that term food desert, it sounds like a thing that just is. Like, that's a desert. It has sand. You know, that's a desert. It doesn't have a grocery store. But it's not just as simple as this area just doesn't have a grocery store. We have to consider the intentional acts that led to the fact that this community does not have access to fresh produce. We can't forget the systemic oppression and systemic racism that has led to the fact that this area does not have access to fresh, healthy food. So the reason I use the term food apartheid is because these acts are intentional. You know, growing up in an area where, you know, there was a grocery store and now there isn't anymore. And so now these people are left with McDonald's and sort of the high calorie, high fat, low nutrition food in their community. So there are businesses there, but nothing is healthy. Why is that? Why is there not a Whole Foods or something like it there? Why is there not one of those make your own salad type places? And somebody will say, well, that's because they don't want that. Who said they don't want it? Who told you that Black people won't eat healthy? Is it because when we got here, we weren't allowed to eat fresh food and healthy food and the healthier options? We were given the leftovers when we were an enslaved people? Are you saying that because once we had an opportunity to kind of build our own communities and we had our own restaurants and grocery stores, that our cities in many cases were burned down? Are you saying that our areas were redlined so that the property values in our areas are not as valuable to not only us, but then the grocery stores that might want to come in? So even though it may be a great move to say, oh, put a grocery store over here, but the grocery store says, yeah, but my property value is going to suck because somebody put a line and said, this is undesirable. So it's intentional through, you know, one step here, one thing here, one restriction here. And they were intentional. It's not the fault of the people there, and it's not a random phenomenon. It's on purpose, which is what apartheid is.
Wow, it's really important, I think, distinction, because like you say, food desert, it hasn't got that active side to it, that this has been done deliberately. So thank you for sharing that. And it's incredible the work that you're doing. And obviously, you know, if anyone wants to help or support, you know, like to continue, you know, food love or help to find it a home, obviously get in contact with Kimberly, because this is really, really important stuff, that even though you started it during COVID, which obviously has highlighted all this injustice and everything, it's an ongoing issue. And it's an incredible program. So, you know, amazing kudos to you for doing that. It's wonderful. And no wonder it's an award-winning program. So it's amazing. So our final, to wrap up, we've got our rapid fire questions. So these are just, I'm going to ask you a question, just answer them in sort of, you know, one sentence or less. It's like a little bit of rapid fire, unless you say something really juicy, and then I might ask you to expand on it. But otherwise, these are a little rapid fire. Okay. So what's the most courageous thing you've ever done?
Food love. Yeah. Good Lord. Yes.
Fair enough. Yes, absolutely. What does leadership mean to you, and what style or kind of leader do you believe you are?
That's such a hard question for me. And it's hard for me to do it in one sentence, so I'm trying.
That's all right. You can use more if you need to. I'll give you an exemption.
Okay, thank you. So I think a big part of leadership to me is empathy, and guiding through principles. For me, the way that leadership plays out, and, you know, anybody who has worked with me, is that I have a keen ability to flip upside down the norm that is what we would call corporate America, and allow people to exist and breathe and feel comfortable with all of the good and bad that's going on in their life without fear of repercussions. And an example of that is like, hey, I'm not feeling well today, or whatever that is. I'm having a bad mental health day. Like, can I just take a break for the day? Yes, you can. You don't have to explain it. It is what it is. And building that trust is something that I do with my team. And so that for me is what leadership is. It's about creating trust. It's about empathy, and all of the other things I just said.
I love it. Wonderful. What do you love most about yourself?
My hair. I think it's amazing.
Your hair is amazing. I love how you got like the little blonde bits. I was thinking that when you come on, I'm like, wow, her hair looks really cool.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And finally, have there been a couple of I know you've shared a lot already, maybe one or two key lessons that you've learned throughout your life to date that you would like to share with other vegan women leaders?
I think I'm going to take it back to the leadership question a little bit that you had, and consider what it means within your team to lead empathetically. Because I know as a vegan, we have empathy for animals. But often with business, what we've done is we've taken kind of this colonized mindset of what business should look like. I've seen several women leaders who encourage activities that would be considered exploitative. Not paying people fairly because you're trying to reach a particular goal. And so you need to cut back on budget. I would say, let's look at empathy across the board. Let's look at equity across the board. It's a little tough to be a vegan leader without also carrying that just across your other experiences, you know? Because you can't just, there's no way that the love and the compassion that you have for animals can't bleed over into people. It's really tough to be that, because then you start to question whether or not your veganism is actually empathy or just white saviorism, you know? Because if you can't see that empathy of other people, then you're really just trying to be the savior of, and not the empathetic being that we would hope you to be. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Wonderful. You shared so many wonderful insights and little light bulbs going off for me. I'm looking forward to listening to and watching this again, because I think it's incredible what you've done. I love your creativity, your passion, all the terrific projects that you've done. So thank you so much for sharing what you have today, Kimberly. And for anybody, if you're watching the episode, you will see the website mightbevegan.co. So do go and check out Kimberly's website, and you'll see links to the socials there. If you're listening to the audio version of this episode, that link will be on the show notes page. Kimberly, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad we got to do this. You're incredible, and I'm very much looking forward to what you're doing next. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Bye for now.